Okay, well, I so appreciate all of y'all being here today, and the lessons that I've been able to hear, and the classes that you taught have all been fantastic. I look forward to going back and listening to the classes that I missed today. But I love the chance to do panel discussions like this because we get the collective wisdom of the group. So the first question I think is a good, easy question to start with, and we'll just go down the line, starting with you, Zach, and just go down the line. What is the best piece of parenting advice someone has given you? Is it on? It should be on. Is it on? There we go.
Never underestimate the power of presence. Mm-hmm. So the always being willing to show up. I think that's the biggest, even with all these topics, just being present.
Talk about raising good kids, and that is a great thing, but that's not our job. Our job isn't to raise good kids, it's to raise adults. So raise them in such a way that they are going to be an adult who's a Jesus follower, an adult who puts, whatever it is you're trying to impart on them. So don't look at raising kids, look at raising them to be adults.
I'm afraid this is going to sound too clever, or maybe not too clever. It was to not listen to all the parents who are giving you advice. That was particularly when you have small children, because everybody wants to, whatever.
So I was actually going to say that nobody gave me parenting advice, but I think that might be because we got 3 children all at one time, if you haven't heard our kind of crazy story. So I really think people just felt kind of pity on us. But I guess the positive that I'll add to that is, people joining you on the journey for parenting, and that it doesn't have to be a solo act, and allowing other people to join you on that journey and provide support to you. So it's not advice that I got, but it's something that was offered to me instead of advice, was love and care and wisdom from our community here and our friends. So
I think just being encouraged to quickly say, in those moments when we've blown it, like we all do, to be really quick to say, I'm sorry, and to ask, please forgive me, and to just model that, and the ownership of our failings and mistakes that hopefully they will reflect in their lives, that everything's just open and transparent, and if they mess up, they can tell us, and it's okay. They're loved anyway.
Whitney, I'll let you take that mic from Tim. I'll start with you because I was just in your class, and it was a fantastic class. And I think this next question will go down the line. Anybody else that would like to weigh in on this as well? But Whitney, we'll start with you. What is one thing you think kids are hoping that their parents will talk to them about? We've had a lot of conversation about conversations today, and I know that there are probably things that our kids are thinking about, and they're actually hoping, they may not tell us that they're hoping that we'll talk about those things with them, but what are some of those things do you think that kids may be hoping that their parents will bring up with them?
It's the hardest question. I'll be honest with you. In my session today, I talked about asking the hard questions about mental health. But really, honestly, I think it's talking about like those hard things that we're actually really scared to talk about that are going on in the world, like sexuality. Was that you who talked about sexuality? Was it you? Okay, good. Talking about...
She was teaching. She didn't get to be in the class.
Yeah, I didn't get to come see you. But talking about sexuality, talking about sex, they say they don't want you to talk about it. Like, they make it seem like it's really awkward if you bring it up, if you haven't gotten there yet. But the reality is they want you to be the ones to ask first. The one thing that I guess I'll add to that is they want you to set limits and talk to them about healthy media usage. Boundaries, even though they push them, that's actually something they really do seek, and they long for that structure that we can offer them. So having healthy discussion about healthy boundaries, especially with technology use, is something that kids actually they want to better understand even when you get pushback on it. So.
Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in on that question?
Can I just ditto that first part about the sexuality part? Yeah, that's.
I would say it's not necessarily to talk to him about, sorry, don't mean to give you the dead mic, but I think what I would say is that not necessarily a topic, I mean, the sexuality thing, and I deal with college students mostly. They just want to know that you're going to love them no matter what, because they might disagree with you or they may not see it the same way. And it's so scary for college students because they think you're going to find out something about them and all of a sudden that you're not going to love them anymore. It maybe seem unreasonable because you think, well, surely you know as a parent I'm going to love you. That's not necessarily slam dunk. So I think they want to know that they're loved no matter what, and no matter what the conversation is, and those conversations to be had, but the affirming of, I'm not going to be able to tell you something or do something. Yeah, you might disagree, but you're not going to lose our love.
During my session, I talked a little bit about choosing our battles, and of course that's kind of a cliche when it comes to parenting, is picking your battles or choosing your battles. And I was joking with some of the elders during the last class session that sometimes the battle that one spouse chooses to have with the kids is not the same battle or the battle the other spouse wishes that they would have chosen with the kids. So the next question is, how do you try to stay on the same page as your spouse when it comes to parenting? Anybody want to volunteer to jump into that one?
Okay, I'll start.
Can we cut the recording?
I think there's some blessings with that. One, making sure you're on the same page. Always asking this question, have you already talked to the other, mom or dad or whoever? The other good thing about that is sometimes you wait on the discipline. In my opinion, that's a good thing because you wait on enforcing whatever the form of discipline is for your kid until you talk to the other parent. It also calms a lot of frustration. It calms people down. And so I say that's good, but definitely being on the same page. This may be something, mom or dad, whichever role you're in, has got more of an opinion than you do about it, but definitely be on the same page. But like I said, use that blessing of, we're going to talk about it where mom and dad get home. And that gives you more time to be wise in your decisions and to have everybody kind of calm down.
This doesn't undermine what Warren's saying, because I agree with that, but there's also an opportunity here to show our kids or young people that mom and dad don't actually agree either, and model that. And so a bit admitting that, but it kind of depends on the topic, especially if it's something that there needs to be an immediate consequence or discipline on, that it's not just a general conversation, because I agree on that delay, but it's also okay, in my opinion. I think it's wise to have had the conversation so that you're not surprising the other with, well, I don't agree with this, There's a little bit of that, but I do think that it gives you an opportunity to model disagreement if that's the topic.
Something that Aaron and I started, our oldest two were adopted and came to live with us at the same time. So our journey into starting parenting was kind of interesting, but something that we started we started off by doing just visits with them. And I can't tell you how many nights we would come home, we'd get into bed, and we'd say, well, how do you think that visit went? How did you feel about their response? Or did you notice this? Or how are you feeling about this? And which was a unique experience. People don't really do that, I think, as they start the parenting journey, but ours was different. But it's actually something that we, I think, have done a really good job at carrying into our parenting. Now that we're 3 years into this, oftentimes we'll sit down at night being, hey, Waylon brought this up with me today, and I told him I wanted to talk about it with you first. Let's, kind of, what do you think about this? And we dedicate time, usually, 5 or 10 minutes of our evening when we get into bed, just talking about how we think everything is going. And I think that communication is really important. And I think it allows our kids to see a unified front. But I think the disagreement piece is huge, because I think a lot of kids nowadays, they don't know how to disagree, or they think that marriages don't include disagreement, and they absolutely do. So I'm glad you added that piece. So carving out the time.
And just tagging in on that a little bit, you know, talking about when there's one has picked a battle that the other one has picked. Once it has been started, though, and you can acknowledge that, you know, Mom and I don't see eye to eye on that, but she has already had this conversation with you, and we are united in this. So even though it might not have been a battle you picked, once the battle's begun, and one parent has kind of launched out there, the kids need to know that you've got her back and she's got her back, and we disagree on this. I might not have, you know, if I had been home when this happened instead of her being home, this consequence might not have come about, but it has. And so, you know, I support her in that, and this is our expectation of you, whether you initiated it or not.
Yeah. We'll start this next one with Zach, and then maybe we'll go to Brian and talk about this, because it pertains both to young children and teenagers as they're growing, but also to college students. I know that there's a lot of us as parents, we're concerned about the growing trend of young people who are falling away, who are not continuing to be disciples as they get into college and as they leave college. And so that kind of reflects on maybe what we're doing before they get to high school graduation. And so what are we doing, do you think, across the board as far as youth ministry goes and training young people that's effective or maybe could be more effective? How do we make sure that we're more effective in what we're doing with our young people prior to high school graduation that helps to prevent that falling away when they get to college?
This is an easy answer for me, but the application is ongoing. I think it's following the advice of those that are older, training those that are younger. This is a piece that, me not knowing all the congregations represented, if you call something a program, it's completely fine. I don't really care. But I think that we've allowed the word ministry to become programs. And so you've got a children's program, a youth ministry program. When ministry's ministry, programs are just these, you know, it's like saying form a committee. Well, it's a group of people trying to accomplish something. And we've hired people that handle it. I am completely for freeing someone up financially to dedicate their time to something. Because that's my definition, we don't pay ministers. We free them up financially so they can do what all of us are trying to do. And so a minister that's fully invested is doing that much more because they've been freed up financially to do so. But all of us have the same heart, the same mission. You look through Scripture, we're all within that priesthood. And so it's, like I said, I rattled that off because I've thought about it before, but goodness, the practice of that is difficult, because if you aren't freed up financially, then you have a lot of these other commitments, and not to say that ministers in and of themselves don't have their own family commitments. Where it's done the best is when I see a middle-aged family that invests in young people, and it has nothing to do with the program. And it's about relationships. There's another side note to this, and I'm still chewing on this. We've defined church, old people, us, whoever that is, of what that looks like. Now, don't wrap me up in the Christian Chronicle anytime soon, okay? I'm not saying forsaking the assembly, but how we do church is we design that. Because you go back to the Old Testament, you can go back to the Old Testament if you want to. If you go back to the New Testament, and we see how church would have been, and if we're truly saying and we're going to do it the way it was done, then there'd be some settings where we have to whisper because we don't want anybody to find out, because if government finds out, they're going to get involved. And so we're already away from the originalness of the context of how it worked. What's the end goal? And I do believe in weekly assembly. I do believe in us having communion together. I do believe everything that you would say as the right Bible class answers of what needs to take place. But how we do it, we've kind of grown into that definition. And so I think maybe even evaluating a little bit of what does that look like. And so that last piece is more like I stirred up this mess, and I'm like, I don't know, y'all figure that out too. But the first part is the part that I really am convicted on, that we've just assigned that to people either that we've freed up financially, or even if it's a volunteer that's a teacher or whoever it may be, and then everybody else just comes and does their thing and then goes about. So I think I would ask myself, if I'm concerned about in my own congregation, I think I would say, okay, how many people from the ages of 15 to 25 do I know personally by name and have been underneath the roof of my house, and how many of them have had their feet underneath my table? And I think that'll define maybe how many people are going to be there in 10 years.
I think that first, the college students that we have, they're questioning everything. And they come from homes and churches where everything is non-negotiable. We have all the answers. We tell them all that what's right and wrong, and that is part of our role. But they're questioning everything. And in the younger ages, what seems to be the case is most of our kids are coming from places where they were either too scared to ask the questions, or the questions were too rote and sort of rigid. And so that causes them to wrench themselves out of the context that they grew up in, looking for the answers. So we could do a better job of providing scriptural answers, but also not demeaning them for the questions. Not that you're demeaning, but I'm a parent. And so I get sometimes we just have these pat answers. They're not satisfying anymore to any of them. And the next thing is when they come to college, and we're a pretty conservative town, A&M, pretty conservative college, but it's getting to be more and more like the church they grew up in. They're not finding churches exactly like that. And instead of, I try to tell, I think that if we were to say, these are some non-negotiables when you're looking for a church home, as opposed to everything being non-negotiable, you allow them within the guardrails to seek out faith, and you're going to have to understand it might not look exactly like yours. That's happening whether you acknowledge it or not. Our kids come in and we talked about this, but they're looking for wherever they belong. And I joked about it in my second class. I don't know if it was very funny, but I use it, and it's not going to be funny. You don't have to laugh. Those kids will go to it doesn't matter if they're sacrificing baby chickens. They're going to go to where they belong and where they can find questions and be able to answer. They're not even that concerned about the answers they are, but they're really concerned about you accepting the questioning. They're going to go through that period, and they need to get through that period and out to the other side. But the non-negotiable, rigid, it has to be this way, this is the only way, is not producing what we think it's producing.
Anybody else?
Christian Chronicle can write that.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Okay, Tim, we'll come to you on this next one. You thought you were going to get rid of the microphone, didn't you? Yeah. There's probably a lot of people here that could say the same thing as the question that I received, including myself. Exposed to pornography at a very young age. There's probably many of us that were exposed to pornography at a young age. And for many, that exposure went on to be a struggle that they've had for a while. How do we as parents address that? Obviously, when we were all younger, it might have been magazines or videos, and today with the internet, it is far more prevalent than it's ever been. And so pornography is, I'm sure, much more of a problem today than it has been in generations past. So how do we address that? And then also, and again, anyone can weigh in on this after Tim does, but but also the false expectations that pornography helps to create. How do we help our young people to have the right expectations about sex and marriage, and also to deal with the issues surrounding pornography?
Okay, and again, I can't imagine you younger parents that are raising kids now. You talked about that early exposure. You know, for me, it was in the first grade, and that was in the early 70s. And so with internet access like it is, I know that the challenge that it is, and I think initiating these conversations that we're talking about that are sometimes hard for us to have as adults, but we need to have them with our kids, helping them understand the beauty of the way God created us. And he created us as sexual beings with purpose and with beauty, that he has a plan for the way that's to be fulfilled, and that the world has other ideas about that, and just to prepare them for the fact that they may start to see things that devalue and diminish the beauty of what God has created, that dehumanize and victimize. And from as early an age, it makes sense for you to talk to your kids. I mean, this mentality exists among adults because it's a rationalization we make. It's a victimless activity. It is not a victimless activity. There are people, it's objectifying. It is dehumanizing, and there are people who have made choices to get into that industry. There are people who have been forced into that industry because of forces and choices of other people, and we can't condone that. We can't subsidize that. We can't buy into that. And so just preparing our kids for, you know, when you start seeing images that are disturbing, this is what that means, and that is somebody's daughter, and that is somebody's sister, and that may be somebody's mother, and to bring humanity to the problem. And I know the expectations then that creates, and that can even, I mean, I know that there are books written from Christian perspectives on sexuality that basically set up the same type thing, that if you honor God's plan, you know, if you remain celibate until marriage, then your sex life is going to be incredible. And I mean, I know there are books that basically teach that, and then that's not the reality that they experience. And, you know, there are issues and there are struggles. So it's not just the pornography industry that sometimes contributes to that. It's sometimes well-meaning believers like us creating unrealistic expectations that if you'll just wait until marriage, then this will be the most beautiful, problem-free relationship you've ever had. And then also, I think, emphasizing the selflessness of that sexual relationship rather than the selfishness of that sexual relationship will help work through some of those issues.
Yeah. That's why I was dittoing what was mentioned earlier about what they want you to talk about and need you to talk about is that. And they're never going to ask for it, but you need to be proactive and talking to them about it. I think we've done a disservice over the number of years in the church as a whole is not talking about it. I've been at the same place about 20 years now, and early on in that time, you don't talk about it. Maybe they talk about it in the high school class. I'm like, no, we need to talk about it in the junior high class too. And then over the years, we've kind of thought maybe we need to talk about it from a biblical perspective, even for those that are younger. And there's multiple reasons on that. One is because part of the issue with pornography is not just what you're looking at or viewing, but also then that secrecy and shame and not feeling you can talk with anybody else. And so being open and talking about whether it's that struggle, but then also talking about sex was God's idea in the first place, and so talk about that even at a young age. Tomorrow I'm talking about it with one of our teen classes because that's where we're at in Scripture. It's in Scripture. We're not talking about Song of Solomon tomorrow, but we've talked about that before because it is God's idea, and so I think taking off that veil of, it's an untouchable topic, And then, as was mentioned before, if you don't talk about it and being God's idea, and there's going to be some struggles, even if you do the biblical things, I definitely did what was just mentioned about there are families that struggled, that did the right thing, and couples that then wonder, who can I talk to about sex? Because I did what I was supposed to do, and because of that secrecy or shame, they don't even want to sometimes find help even in those situations.
I think that there was, for a certain amount of time, and maybe this still lingers in some minds, that you didn't bring it up because you didn't want to pique somebody's interest, because then now they're going to go looking for it and you're the reason. We're way past that. It's already there, so us bringing it up is not bringing it to their attention. And I think that there was a time that was one of the main rationales for why we left it alone. But sadly, maybe that's no longer an excuse.
There's one more thing, I guess it's related to this. Don't have the talk with your kids. It makes it sound singular. It's not just one talk, and sometimes it's a continual conversation, and there's different levels and age appropriateness to that, but don't have the talk.
That's good.
Mine's going to be real fast, but just in the clinical setting, the rates of pornography use among females is increasing exponentially. I think a lot of us who have girls think, oh man, I dodged that bullet, but the reality is be really mindful that you haven't, and that pornography discussion is one to have with all of our children.
Warren, you mentioned the word shame a minute ago, and the next question from one of our participants asked about correcting children. So it could very well pertain to this subject of pornography, but it could pertain to any number of things. But how do we correct our children without shaming them? And so that I think is something that we all want to strike that balance. So how do we correct our children, you think, without shaming them? Any thoughts on that?
It's tough, and this is one of those things that every kid is going to be different. Maybe having a one-on-one conversation, and maybe starting with, hey, you've maybe struggled in this area, or you messed up with whatever the situation is, but talk about some of your failures. And it really helps to kind of open those doors to say, hey, I'm not as the parent getting on to you for how dare you, but open up by saying, hey, we all struggle. We've all messed up at times. Let me tell you about something that I have or still struggle with. To me, that I don't know, that lowers the bar of a lot less shame.
I think asking a young person, tell me a little bit about what led you to this. Of you heard about it, you're curious, and then followed with, that makes sense. I see why that could have happened. Let me talk to you about that a little bit. And so, because if you shut them down, obviously they're not coming back with that question, but. The reason why someone came to wherever, if it's against God, it's the ultimate answer is Satan, and so you never are you mad at them, ever. There's not a reason to be mad. You can be sad, and you can be walking along with them, but to be mad, if we're going to be mad, we need to be mad at Satan and mad at evil, not mad at a child or a young adult that's making a certain decision.
And you trying to distinguish between just correction of attitude or behavior with something that would cause them to feel personal shame is just use language that separates the attitude and the action from their identity and their person. And you can't affirm enough with them how much they are loved. And, in conceiving of God's unconditional love and in thinking of it in terms God can't love you more than he already loves you. There's nothing you can do that will cause God to love you more. He loves you perfectly. There's nothing that you can do that will cause God to love you less. He loves you perfectly. And for our kids to hear from us that we love them the same way. We're unhappy about your attitude. We're unhappy about the action that took place. I love you as much now as I did before you did that, or before you developed that attitude. And, we can't just assume that they're going to know that that's our underlying feelings toward them, so we can't say it enough. I can't love you any more than I do. I can't love you any less than I do. But let's talk about this. And it's not about who you are. It's about what you did. It's about what you said. It's about the way you said it. And always separate the action or the attitude from the identity in the person.
The last question for everyone, we may start with Whitney, because I think maybe you said something in your class that kind of sparked this idea too, but I'm sure that there are many of us here this afternoon that are just tired, and sometimes coming to a conference like this can excite us, and we can think about things that we need to do differently and improvements that we need to make. I appreciate Zach's comments about picking one or two takeaways and not overwhelming ourselves. But this question has to do with self-care. Like, how do we as parents make sure that we're not only taking care of our kids, but that we're taking care of ourselves emotionally and physically and spiritually? So what are some tips or advice you have on that?
Catching me at a time when I probably needed to take a lot of my own advice, on this one. So today in my topic, I use the word grace a lot. In previous presentations, I've talked a lot about self-compassion. We are really just in general hard on ourselves as parents, especially parents who are trying to lead our children in the Lord. We just talked about not shaming our children and giving them space and room to make mistakes, and it's critical that we give ourselves this space. We're gonna mess up. It's good to self-reflect when we do, but to have some grace and some compassion. When I talk to families and parents, sometimes I look at them and I say, well, you just said that about yourself and what you're doing as a parent. Like, would you say that to your friend? Because that's kind of harsh. And so just evaluating the way that we treat ourselves, I think is pretty critical. But self-care is kind of a cliche topic sometimes nowadays, but it doesn't happen if you don't carve out time for it. And I'm really guilty of this as a new mom who works 40 hours a week and trying to navigate this new life of ours. I'm quickly learning that if I don't carve out time to pursue the things that I enjoy, that bring me joy outside of my family. And it's okay to admit, there are things outside of family that might bring us joy and passion, like today, and carving out time to get to speak and find time to do a presentation. And those are things that we have to carve out the time for them. If we don't schedule them, they will not happen. Please tell me I'm not the only person, or maybe I'm just behind the game, but to me, the number one is self-compassion and giving yourself grace to make mistakes.
Definitely carving out some time, or whether that's self-care, physically taking care of yourself. Realize if I don't take care of myself physically and get some exercise, it is tough to take care of a family. So physically, we've got to carve out some time for that, but also, and more importantly, spiritually. I mean, we see Jesus' example. There were times that he could have just preached to multitudes, but he was off alone, and he was in quiet time, and he was in prayer with the Father. So if that's important for Jesus, I'm pretty sure all of us should be doing that. Once again, spiritually speaking, physically. As was mentioned, we've also had a crazy week, and every night, and busy with all the different kids and activities. And tonight we're doing a date night because this week has just been overwhelmed and overloaded. And it's going to be different. Sometimes families can't do one every single week, and maybe it's, when our kids were younger, we had kind of a one certain night, and now that our kids are older and we've got responsibilities and helping with our kids, it's going to rotate around, but definitely make that a priority. So spiritually, carve the time out, physically, but also with your spouse. If your kids don't see a healthy marriage and parents that are trying and still, quote, dating each other, then your kids aren't going to have an example of what a marriage lasts past their adolescence. Some are just married until the kids leave. And if they aren't building that relationship with each other, it's tough to really see that. So work on that as well.
Yeah. Brian, did you have a thought?
Go ahead, Brian.
So this weekend, I left yesterday, and I'm not there, and my son's not there, and another student that lives with us is not there. And my wife was so excited. We try, we're not super good at it, to give the other one, this was a scheduled time, it wasn't like, this was sort of just, she couldn't be here anyway, but to be completely alone, even separate from our spouse. I love the date night, I love that scheduled, but you need time alone. And if you don't schedule it, you'll never get it. 2, we both try to, we're not super good at it, better, where I'll go, and I'm not setting myself up as an example of anything, but I tried to be where I'm completely silent, because I've learned from our college students that there is no silence, and they're crowded constantly with noise, as are you. No phone, no Fox News, nobody cares what the Weather Channel is really saying. You just have it on in the background, turn it off, and just be completely quiet. And then in prayers, the difficulty sometimes I've run into, and you just ask for tips, this may not resonate with anybody, is I can even get in a rut and do the same thing, the same prayer, the same phrasing, the same desires. So and they're everywhere. It's so different from what we typically do, but some liturgical prayer books where you can actually read prayers will help key in language and thoughts that you would have never thought of in your own prayer life. And they're easily accessible even online. And just saying even the repetitive prayers and listening and saying out loud prayers that others have prayed is a great link to a deeper, more conversing and more open prayer time with God. But other than that, it's just a quiet, complete quiet. Wasn't that good for like 3 seconds? And then give yourself a time away from your spouse. I love her, she loves me, but she was flourishing last night when she could just do what she wanted to do. And she got in the attic and put a bookshelf together. That sounds so silly. I don't know why in the world. I would never do that on my time. But that's what she did. That's what I would think. That's self-care for me. It's not lotions and essential oils.
We have time for one more.
Yeah, and I love what you guys are saying about spiritual self-care and emotional self-care and physical self-care. And if we're married as parents, we can help one another in that regard. Just like we talk about sexual relationships, we don't indulge those selfishly, we indulge those selflessly, with our partner. And so as husbands, we can help our wives make sure that we can help provide that time for them, so that we're encouraging, providing for her self-care, and she providing for my self-care. I know it's harder if you're a single parent. And so in our church families where we do have single parents, if we're working harder as married couples to help one another have the self-care we need, as a church family, help these single parents do that, because there may not be anybody in the home that's helping them accomplish those goals and set aside that time. So let's do it for them, in helping with the kids or providing time or providing that space, whatever that might be.
Amen. Well, thank you all for all of your thoughts today and for your classes and your lessons. We appreciate it so much. Would you thank our speakers?